I'm James Doohan. In the next hour, we'll examine the controversial evidence and theories that suggest we're not alone in the universe. If these theories prove to be true, the implications are staggering. In recent times, there have been more reported UFO sightings than ever before. For centuries, these crafts have remained a mystery until now. The footage you're about to see is a startling photographic account that sheds light on the greatest question of our century. Are we really alone? In the past decade, over 15 million people have reportedly witnessed extraterrestrial craft. What's more remarkable is that contemporary science has ignored the evidence that for thousands of years has been in plain sight. Recently in Mexico City, millions of astonished onlookers watched as these and other craft hovered over their city for hours. It was the largest mass UFO sighting in history. Mexican officials even held press conferences asking the public to remain calm. What's more amazing is that these sightings are still occurring even today. In what may be one of the most revealing interviews of our time, nuclear physicist Bob Lazar speaks candidly about his top secret work at the government's saucer research facility known as Area S4. In 1989, he was hired by the military to back-engineer the propulsion system of an extraterrestrial craft.
Obviously, the ET craft do exist. Something had to build them, so there must be aliens. And since there are, and the craft were there must be some sort of factory and an entire civilization somewhere. And if in fact that is true, and it apparently is, then there must be others.
Contact cases are by far the rarest type of UFO sighting. In these instances, a ship or a number of ships are repeatedly sighted by a single witness over an extended period of time. Over the last several years, a Miami resident named Adrienne had what is now considered one of the best documented contact cases in history. At first, the sightings began occurring at some distance from his home, but it wasn't long before the craft began appearing over his backyard. This amazing video footage shows a glowing disc approximately 9 feet in diameter hovering just feet from his house. In a blink of an eye, the craft disappears. Once the footage is slowed down, we can clearly see the craft dematerialize frame by frame. Adrienne's contact case took place over a period of several years and was never reported to the authorities for fear of ridicule and reprisals. Among the numerous hours of footage taken, this sighting remains one of the most dramatic. It began at 10:03 p.m. on October the 20th, 1995, and took place over a 50-minute period. The encounter ended with Adrienne following the craft at high speeds down the freeway. Here we see the craft minutes after the sighting begins. This extraordinary footage has never been broadcast and is being shown here for the first time. Clearly, we can see the craft hovering silently over the homes below. These large crafts are commonly referred to as beam ships, or in some cases, motherships. They gained their reputation by their reported immense size and softly glowing light emitted by the craft's operation. Approximately 38 minutes into the sighting, the ship began hovering away from his house. He followed the craft in his car and stopped along the freeway to film it hovering near an apartment complex. Minutes later, the craft flew directly over Miami's International Airport, where it hovered momentarily. The ship then flew into a residential area and accelerated out of sight. As the craft emerged from a wooded field, he was able to continue videotaping, but it wasn't long before it began accelerating again. While pacing it at over 50 miles an hour, it flew off out of sight. This slow-motion enhancement clearly shows the craft as it's speeding along the shoreline. To this day, Adrienne maintains he is still experiencing the reoccurring sightings. Since then, they have frequently appeared in UFO sighting reports. This cigar-shaped craft was filmed hovering in Rhode Island in 1967. A similar elongated UFO was videotaped in 1980 in the skies over Hagen, Germany. These pictures of a cigar-shaped UFO were taken in California. This UFO was photographed in Earth's orbit. crowds gathered in Krasnodar, Russia, to marvel at this luminous cigar-shaped UFO. This dramatic footage was later broadcast on Soviet television.
The evidence is overwhelming. No single program in history has ever amassed such a compelling collection of footage. We'll use computer analysis, optical enhancement, and expert testimony to help bring the truth to light. But first, when did these sightings begin? The evidence suggests that mankind has been visited since the dawn of time. Recently, researchers point to one undeniable event that sparked the largest wave of sightings in history: the detonation of the atomic bomb. Unknowingly, we had sent an invitation to the universe, establishing ourselves as an advanced civilization.
The Air Force has officially analyzed the motives of possible visitors from space. Here is a direct quotation from the official report. Such a civilization might observe that on Earth we now have atomic bombs. We should therefore expect at this time above all to behold such visitation.
As early as 1947, alien craft began responding to our open invitation by arriving in large numbers. If advanced civilizations wanted to monitor our nuclear technology, New Mexico was the place to be. Because of its remote location, New Mexico was the site of the military's atomic research and testing. Post-war missile tests were conducted at White Sands, and Roswell was home to the only atomic bomber squad in the world. To date, the biggest day in Roswell's history remains, July 2nd, 1947, when Mac Brazel, a rancher who lived just outside of Roswell, was startled that evening by a loud explosion outside. The following day, while checking on a remote water pump on his ranch, Mac made an astounding discovery. Spread over an area 100 yards wide and 3/4 of a mile long was crashed debris. Under top-secret security, the debris was collected down to the smallest piece. The base commander had already ordered a press release announcing they had recovered a flying disc. As the news traveled around the world, the phones began to ring off the hook back at the base. The Air Force quickly realized the implications of their hasty press release and issued a cover story. In a press conference held the next day, a metallic reflector was displayed for the reporters as proof the incident was nothing more than a downed weather balloon. Recently declassified government top-secret documents confirm the Roswell incident. The report states on July 7, 1947, a secret operation had begun to assure recovery of the wreckage of an alien craft for scientific study. The Roswell incident caught the military off guard. Faced with the fear of widespread public panic, the government began the largest covert operation in history. Their objective was twofold. First, research the alien visitors and their craft, and second, divert the public's attention away from the subject of UFOs. In response to the Roswell crash, then-President Harry Truman formed a special investigative team of 12 hand-picked scientists and military officers to manage the situation. Secretly known as Majestic 12 or MJ-12, the panel's directive was to research the UFO phenomenon and keep it out of the public eye. Recently, private lawsuits and the Freedom of Information Act allowed for the release of many top-secret documents from this era. These once top-secret papers also clearly describe multiple alien vehicle recovery operations and civilian sighting reports. Even seemingly insignificant alien encounters were documented in great detail and were treated as an issue of national security. At the end of MJ-12's preliminary investigation, General Nathan F. Twining issued a top-secret memo relating their findings. The memo stated that, quote, "The phenomenon is something real and not visionary or fictitious. There are objects probably approximating the shape of a disk, of such appreciable size as to appear to be as large as man-made aircraft, yet circular or elliptical in shape, flat on the bottom and domed on the top, and making no associated sound." In his report, the general described the alien craft as capable of extreme maneuverability and very evasive when sighted or contacted by friendly aircraft. By the early 1950s, the public was fully aware of the growing UFO phenomenon. As the number of sightings increased, the government began more research.
the alien craft represented a technological advantage, and if the government was to maintain the national security, they had to control the situation. But the number of sightings made the job impossible. The public demanded an explanation.
There have been a certain percentage of this volume of reports that have been made by credible observers of relatively incredible things. It is this group of observations that we now are attempting to resolve.
It was sightings like this one filmed in Kentucky that made the situation impossible to contain. The military had no choice but to try and explain the UFO sightings. Photos like these fueled public interest. This sequence was taken of a disc-shaped craft flying off the coast of the island of Trinidad. The pictures were taken by an official photographer of the Brazilian Navy aboard the naval training ship Almirante Saldanha. After the official analysis proved the craft was 120 feet in diameter, the Brazilian president presented the photographs in a press conference.
During the early 1950s, sightings were being reported in record numbers. The Air Force could barely handle the overwhelming volume of calls. If the government was to maintain secrecy, they would have to collect their own information firsthand.
The first UFO tracking project was installed in Alaska. The Air Force installed sophisticated cameras and detection equipment aboard specialized reconnaissance planes to retrieve the best possible information on the UFOs. The project was placed under the command of Lieutenant Colonel Wendell Stevens. I
remember one report where an object got in behind the trailing edge of the large wing and ahead of the smaller wing in the position, open position there, and remained for 2 or 3 minutes, and they got pictures with all of the movie cameras and the handheld cameras, including the 8x10 Fairchild camera. All of the data that was recorded by this special equipment, the cartridges, cassettes, rolls of film, and everything, after a mission with an encounter, was removed from the canisters and the equipment items and packed in a metal box and chained to an officer's wrist and flown to Washington that night. And this happened on a frequency of about 3 or 4 times a month for the whole 1.5 years that I was doing this in Alaska.
Despite the military's ongoing efforts to divert public attention, the UFO phenomenon took center stage. Aliens made their debut at the World's Fair, and the public was treated to a seemingly endless wave of alien movies. Many wondered why UFOs hadn't made their presence known by buzzing the nation's capital, as they had done in the movies. In July 1952, that's exactly what happened, and it happened twice. The New York Times reported formations of glowing discs maneuvered over the Capitol as eyewitnesses on the ground snapped pictures. Radar operators clocked the UFO speeds up to 7,000 miles per hour. 1 week later, the discs returned. The Air Force said what people had seen was a temperature inversion. The pictures tell a different story.
A special session was held in the Pentagon to deal with the situation. The result was a bold new program. Now the military's protocol focused on training and debunking or scientifically disproving the growing phenomena. They thought discrediting the sightings would decrease the public interest, and so the cover-up began.
On the next Sci-Fi
Project Blue Book. The objectives of the program are twofold. First of all, to try to determine if the UFO phenomenon presents a threat to the security of the United States. And second, to determine if the UFO phenomenon exhibits any technological advances which could be channeled into research and development.
There's nothing to hide.
There's nothing to hide at all.
Although congressmen questioned the program, no official conclusions were given. Project Blue Book continued as its research explained sightings like these as seagulls and swamp gas. Many people were not satisfied with these explanations.
The Air Force itself has officially admitted that flying saucers exist. This statement appears in Project Saucer Case number 75.
Project Blue Book was abruptly terminated in 1969. Of the 10,000 cases officially investigated, only a few remained a mystery.
The height of the Cold War ushered in the space race. Suddenly, America found itself in a heated competition with Russia to put a man on the moon.
America's attention was focused on NASA as space exploration became the nation's top priority. But as NASA soon found out, the Russians weren't the only ones who were watching.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
It was a race like mankind had never seen before. Who would be the first to conquer the vast distances of space? But what MJ-12 and the Air Force already knew, NASA was finding out for themselves. NASA's official policy is that it is not engaged in any UFO research. But NASA's own logs showed that practically all of their early Gemini and Apollo missions encountered UFOs. In 1985, NASA released UFO footage taken by their astronauts in lunar and terrestrial orbit. This film was taken by astronaut James McDivitt aboard Gemini 4. The next day, he snapped this photo of a cylindrical UFO in Earth's orbit. One day before the historical landing on the moon on July 20th, 1969, the Apollo 11 crew filmed luminous disks in orbit around the moon. On an Apollo 12 film, a bright object was observed flying around the lunar surface with great speed. Here, a gigantic dome-shaped disk was filmed in stationary orbit above the moon's surface. Here we see two UFO that have landed on the lunar surface. When we magnify the image, we can see the disks in great detail. Even though NASA doesn't officially recognize the alien craft, it has its own extensive written policies governing contact with extraterrestrial life forms. In the mid-1970s, NASA launched the Viking probe. Its mission was to map the surface of Mars. Viking relayed back these pictures of unexplainable structures from the Cydonia region of the planet. Viking's low-orbit pass photographed these structures in detail, revealing several giant pyramids and what appears to be a face carved in stone. After close examination, the face measured over 1.5 miles in length. NASA was quick to respond to the public's claims that they had discovered the proof of an alien civilization. The official explanation for the structures was that the pictures contained missing data and Viking's cameras could not transmit the remaining information. Despite NASA's official position, many astronauts have come forward with their own UFO encounters. James Lovell, Deke Slayton, James McDivitt, Wally Schirra, Gordon Cooper, and others have gone public with their encounters. In 1978, Gordon Cooper wrote a letter to the United Nations panel on UFOs stating that these are extraterrestrial vehicles visiting from other planets. In March 1989, the crew of the Space Shuttle Discovery may have had its own close encounter. A ham radio operator claims that he picked up the voice of the shuttle pilot, Colonel Blaha, speaking on a secret NASA channel.
Houston, this is Discovery. We still have the alien spacecraft under appearance.
NASA maintains that this is not Colonel Blaha's voice. Another space shuttle mission filmed several disks in high-altitude orbit traveling at several thousand miles per hour. Shortly thereafter, NASA began scrambling all shuttle transmissions. Despite the evidence, NASA maintains their official position and has explained these encounters as space debris or spatial anomalies.
The turmoil in the 1960s diverted the public's attention away from the UFO phenomenon. Incidents like the Vietnam War and Watergate aided the government's debunking program. By the early 1970s, UFOs were no longer the topic of national interest. But despite the government's successful efforts, the sightings continued to increase in numbers.
Some experts believe that this is the world's best UFO film. It was taken by Matt Lane Rutherford in Silver Springs, Maryland. Mr. Rutherford took footage after twilight as the disc hovered over his backyard. Scientists examined the footage and concluded the craft appeared to be maneuvering in its own gravitational field. Took this picture of a metallic craft as it circled his house. In 1978, a terrified housewife in Spain snapped a picture of these UFOs while watching the sunset. This footage was taken by an Australian TV crew on December the 31st, 1978. This luminous domed craft appeared to have a rim around the center and two large portholes. It maneuvered at such an incredible speed it left this track on a single frame of film. No known conventional aircraft can fly at such speeds. In 1978, the United Nations released statistics showing that since 1947, 63,144 UFO sightings were reported. That's approximately 1 every 4 hours. Even President Jimmy Carter had his own alien encounter. While governor of Georgia, he filed this 7-page UFO report stating he spotted a glowing object hovering for 12 minutes in the skies over Georgia. The report was personally signed by Carter himself. This dome-shaped craft was filmed by a television crew from New Zealand in January 2nd, 1979. We can clearly see the craft from the top. The disc appears to be rotating while emitting a blue glow. An identical craft was photographed in 1952 by a Brazilian journalist in Rio de Janeiro. Here we see the dome is visible from 2 angles and the side is surrounded by large portholes. This sighting was filmed from the parking lot of the Rio Casino Hotel in Las Vegas, Nevada. When the footage was enhanced, a disc-shaped craft can be seen with a dome on the top and a series of portholes surrounding the craft. In 1991, this footage made worldwide headlines. These 2 discs were videotaped in a suburban neighborhood just outside Ottawa, Canada. Both UFOs landed in what appears to be a pre-arranged site. This footage became known as the Guardian sighting. In 1991, eyewitnesses screamed as a photographer took this picture off Manhattan Island as a disc emerged from the river and flew off. This craft was photographed rising out of the water in Australia as it docked with a smaller dark object. This UFO was spotted in Denver, Colorado as witnesses watched from a neighbor's backyard. In the mid-1990s, startled eyewitnesses filmed these craft as they hovered silently in the night skies. In the months following, similar craft were videotaped on 3 different continents. It was rare that sightings like these gained much national attention. But President Ronald Reagan's speech to students at Falston High School soon changed all that.
Suddenly there was a threat to this world from some other species, from another planet, outside in the universe. We'd forget all the little local differences that we have between our countries.
2 years later, President Reagan made international headlines when he repeated the alien theme to the General Assembly of the United Nations.
Perhaps we need some outside universal threat to make us recognize this common bound. I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world.
President Reagan's speeches started the public asking questions again. The Cold War era created a defense industry based solely on high technology. As the stealth bombers rolled off the assembly line, rumors surfaced that the military was test flying recovered alien craft at a secret government base known as Area 51.
If the military was going to test fly alien craft, Area 51 was the perfect place to do it. Located some 125 miles outside of Las Vegas, it is one of the least populated expanses in the United States. Area 51 is surrounded on 3 sides by military testing grounds and hidden from public view behind the Groom Mountain Range. This Russian satellite photo shows the base as it appeared in the 1960s. Since then, satellite images have shown the base has expanded immensely. Only a handful of photographs of the base exist, and until recently, the government officially denied its existence. This rare and never-before-seen footage of the base was taken by amateur photographers risking imprisonment if accidentally venturing on government land. But in the mid-1980s, the government seized the adjacent public land, closing off all access to any prying eyes. Sophisticated detection equipment monitors the public BLM land surrounding the base, and private security forces patrol to deter any unwanted lookers. These unmarked black helicopters are used to buzz automobiles, scaring off UFO buffs hoping to snap a photo. But it's photographs like these taken over the Groom Mountain Range that seemingly confirm the rumors. very little actual footage exists of the reported test flights. This amateur videotape shows what eyewitnesses saw hover over the base for several minutes before landing. Area 51 has been called the best-known secret military base in America. The rumors subsided, and in 1996, the state of Nevada renamed the highway which runs parallel to the base. In a massive dedication ceremony open to the press, thousands watched as the governor of Nevada unveiled road signs proclaiming Highway 375 as the extraterrestrial highway.
Now, former government employee and nuclear physicist Bob Lazar breaks his silence. In this extraordinary interview, he discusses his classified work at the military's top secret saucer research facility known as S4.
Bob Lazar is a nuclear physicist specializing in advanced propulsion systems. In 1989, he was hired by the military to back-engineer the propulsion system of an extraterrestrial craft. Lazar worked at what is undoubtedly the most top-secret research facility in the world, S4.
There was absolutely no ET craft, ET technology, anything like that at Area 51. This is why S4 was made specifically to separate it there. People at Area 51 do not have the clearance.
According to Lazar, the military had not been test flying alien crafts at Area 51. Rather, the discs many had videotaped and photographed were actually being flown out of S4, just several miles away.
The S4 facility is an area just off the Papoose lake bed, dry lake bed, and it consists of 9 hangars. The hangars have sloped doors on them with a sand texture coating. At the time that I was working there at McCarran International Airport in Las Vegas, there was a Special Projects EG&G building. When I was told to go to work, I drove there, parked my car there, got in a plane at the airport, flew to Groom Lake, where I deplaned and waited for a bus, and the bus drove me down to S4. The first disc I saw, I believe it was the second, or I think it was the third time I was up there. Upon seeing it, it struck me that, well, this explains all the UFO sightings. Not thinking that it was an extraterrestrial craft, that this must have been some advanced form of fighter that we've been working on for years, and, you know, people have just caught it being tested, so on and so forth. And it never even occurred to me, even though I was looking at an extraterrestrial vehicle, that, you know, this wasn't man-made. I give everything nicknames there. The one I worked on was kind of sleek looking, and I gave it the name the Sport Model. There was one that looked like a Jell-O mold. There was one that looked like a top hat. There was a disc that was turned up on its side, and it had a large projectile hole with the metal bent outwards on it. I can only surmise they were testing it to see if a projectile could penetrate it.
Alien crafts like the one Bob worked on had already been sighted throughout the world. But until Lazar entered the disc, he thought it was man-made.
It probably really hit me when I got inside the craft and looked around and began to understand how the craft was operated, and finally grasped the whole project as a whole, as what we were doing, the fact that we weren't building this thing, we were trying to find out how it was made. We were back engineering it. When I first got to look inside the craft, all I can say, it's an ominous feeling. You walk in there and it feels as if you shouldn't be there. I know that sounds kind of corny, but it's a real ominous feeling. It's not an exciting feeling. It brings up a whole lot of questions in your mind. I only witnessed one test flight up close, officially. That I was just inside the hangar. The craft lifted off the ground, virtually noiseless, other than a small corona discharge on the bottom of the craft, indicating the presence of high voltage. That dissipated at about 30 feet, and it stood there completely silently, and moved over to the left and to the right, and sat back down. That was the entire test. This was quite a scientific feat, to lift something completely silently, under control, and perform a maneuver like that.
A bad feeling about this
facility. Lazar learned how these craft operate,
by studying their propulsion systems.
I had to hang upside down in there to see the lower level, essentially. And there were 3 large gravity amplifiers. These devices looked like about a 2-foot diameter, 4-foot long piece of pipe hanging by a smaller piece of pipe from the level above, and they can be independently positioned. And that's what emits the gravitational waves that propel the craft. They'll use one gravity generator to lift the craft off the ground. And as opposed to what we're used to, for instance, a plane, once it's in the air, we envision thrust or some force coming out the back of it to push it forward. The crafts work completely opposite of that. What they do is once they're hovering in the air, they'll swing the gravity, 2 remaining gravity generators up in front of them and create a distortion, essentially a downhill, and the craft rolls downhill for infinity.
As seen here, these craft don't always fly in a similar fashion. They have been seen and photographed flying in radically different positions. Lazar explains.
There's what they call Omicron configuration, where the craft is using one generator, or Delta configuration, where it's utilizing all 3. Delta configuration would be for space travel. Essentially, the craft will tilt up on its side, focus the 3 gravity generators to a single point, and move through space that way. It's always chasing a little distortion. That's why they look goofy when they fly around at low speed. Gravity will vary somewhat, and you will get odd movements of the craft. So its low speed mode is kind of unstable for the most part.
Lazar was also able to shed light on one of the phenomenon that's commonly seen in so many sightings.
If you were going to see one of these crafts at night operating, it would appear really as a glowing ball or just a bright light in the sky from a distance. Even close up, you'd see a glowing halo around it. What you're dealing with is a high energy source in essentially a gas atmosphere, oxygen, nitrogen. And when you apply enough energy to a gas molecule, they emit photons, they emit light. Well, when you're on the outside, you pretty much think, how could they keep something like this secret? It's a crime against science, it's a crime against the people and all that. But, your feelings change once you're privy to the information. Before I was at S4, I was more or less one of the guys that thought, all these government conspiracy and UFO buffs and things like that were complete lunatics. Obviously, the ET craft do exist. Something had to build them, so there must be aliens. And since there are, and the craft are there must be some sort of factory and an entire civilization somewhere. And if in fact that is true, and it apparently is, then there must be others.
One of the least known aspects of the UFO phenomenon may be the most chilling. With today's sophisticated computer technology and special effects, it's possible to fake a picture or alter video. But this modern technology hasn't always existed. We've uncovered startling new evidence that suggests that mankind has been visited since the beginning of recorded history. This is the oldest known picture of a UFO sighting. Or is it? The earliest recorded sightings occurred in Pakistan over 7,000 years ago. In this dramatic Stone Age cave painting, we can clearly see a human-like being wearing what appears to be a helmet, complete with antenna. In the background, we can see a classic saucer-shaped craft. Archaeologists discovered this 15,000-year-old cave painting in southern France showing disc-shaped craft flying over ritual hunting grounds. So many saucer-shaped craft were depicted, the archaeology team put together a catalog to illustrate the various shapes and sizes. In a Japanese cave painting, we see a large, luminous craft hovering over a crowd watching from below. Throughout the Middle Ages, we can also see evidence of similar flying ships. In some cases, the craft resembles saucers photographed in modern times. This fresco in a monastery in Yugoslavia shows a manned craft flying above the people below. This painting was found in one of the oldest churches in Russia. It shows 2 flying discs with on-looking faces observing the crucifixion. Much about man's oldest civilization, the Sumerians, remains a mystery, except that the remnants of their ancient culture inexplicably appears even today, and their preserved records show contact with alien beings. A recent crop formation found in England depicts two worlds in contact above the Sumerian symbol, translated to read, "The nobles with their flying starships." As shown in these videotapes, most of these crop formations coincide with UFO sightings. In 1975, the first documented contact case took place in Switzerland. A farmer named Billy Meyer made international headlines by taking hundreds of photographs and filming 20 minutes of what some consider is the best UFO footage in the world. Edward Billy Meyer is the eyewitness in one of the most famous yet controversial UFO cases in history. He gained worldwide attention by going public with his alien encounters. Despite the clarity of his photos and films, they remain controversial because he claims to have been in contact with the alien visitors. On January the 28th, 1975, he had his first sighting in the Swiss countryside of Hinwell. According to Billy, he heard a low-pitched hum as he looked up to see a silver disc-shaped craft descending upon him. He was able to snap off a few shots with his camera. 1 month later, on March 8th, 1975, Billy photographed this ship moving along the tree line. This was one of the first UFO pictures to be analyzed by optical computer enhancement. An independent lab confirmed the photograph had not been altered and was considered genuine. March 29, 1976 marked the appearance of a new disc Meyer later referred to as a Variation Type 4 craft. Shortly thereafter, Billy was able to obtain metal samples from one of his encounters. This electron microscope footage of the metal samples was part of an analysis conducted in the United States. Two laboratories independently confirmed the combination of metals were intricately machined, cold fused together, and could not have been produced here on Earth. Shortly after Billy's encounters began, he started to bring his 8mm movie camera with him and filmed several amazing sequences of hovering craft. Perhaps the most striking piece of evidence in the Meyer case is this film clip of a metallic disc hovering over a road below. In this daylight shot, we can clearly see the graceful motion of the metallic disc as two different cars drive directly under it. Yet despite Meyer's efforts and the hard physical evidence, skeptics maintained that the photos and footage were too good to be true. By April 4th, 1978, the contacts had stopped. Billy claims to have had a total of 105 sightings over the 3-year period ever recorded. Guillermo Arriguin from Mexico City was the first to come forward with this footage. When optically enhanced, it clearly reveals the rotating motion of the metallic disc. Meanwhile, 85 miles away in Puebla, a cameraman took this footage of a nearly identical craft. Split-screen enhancement shows the striking similarities between the two. Another witness filmed this craft. The computer enhancement reveals further details of the craft during the mass sighting. This footage was videotaped from the northeast section of Mexico City. Enhancement reveals a pulsating field on the lower half of the craft. Miguel Torres filmed this disc as it moved through the central part of the city. When optically enhanced, a corona discharge or burst of colored light can be clearly seen on the bottom of the craft. Of the 2,000 hours of videos taken, these 6 were picked for comparative analysis. All reveal the same metallic-shaped discs as photographed from the different parts of the city. David Froning, a field propulsion expert, was brought in to analyze this footage.
You see the fact that it probably is a metallic-like structure because you can't see reflections off the edges. The phenomena you see here would be indicative of an effective field propulsion system. I should mention that we do not know how at the present time to perfect effective field propulsion. If there was just nothing here, it would not be as dramatic.
In the days following the eclipse, the sightings continued to grow in numbers. This luminous object was filmed as it flew across the city. Optical enhancements reveal the craft as it travels at a high rate of speed. This UFO was videotaped from an apartment balcony in the city. The photographer filmed this craft as it maneuvered around an industrial building and vanished out of sight. While filming this car commercial, a television crew was caught off guard as they filmed a luminous craft streaking across the sky. This rare UFO formation was taped over at Lisco. Similar formations of craft have been videotaped in Florida and in Belgium. Split window comparison shows the similarities. Public outcry for an official explanation forced the government to respond to the mass sightings. In the only press conference held on the subject, the mayor of Atlisco asked his citizens to remain calm as there were no reports of injuries or damages caused by the alien craft. In one of the more dramatic moments, this amateur video captured a metallic disc traveling through the clouds as it stopped in midair and reversed direction. No conventional aircraft can fly in this manner. UFO were even present during their Independence Day celebration. A military parade and a massive air show commemorated the occasion. As jets flew overhead, a metallic disc suddenly appeared. When the jets tried to intercept the craft, it accelerated, leaving them in its wake.
In the last hour, we've shown you photographs, film clips, videotape, government files, and expert testimony documenting one of the greatest mysteries of our time. The evidence is overwhelming. From ancient artifacts to modern-day sightings, the evidence presents itself. Now, only you can decide. Are we really alone?
Every